Hi, I'm Ellie and welcome to a brand new episode of Cambridge ZooCast. Today we are joined by Arlie.
Hi, I'm Arlie. I'm a second year PhD student in the Aquatic Ecology Group in the Zoology Department, and I also work with the British Antarctic Survey.
So Arlie, can you tell me about your project?
Yeah, so I work on non-native species in Antarctica. So I try to find out if people have accidentally introduced new species to the southernmost part of the world where they previously didn't exist. And I'm a marine ecologist, so I'm focusing on species that live in the ocean. And in practical terms, that means that I'm trying to work out what lives on the outside of ships, under the water, things like barnacles and other little animals that many people have never heard of. I haven't even heard of some of them when I find them. But I'm trying to work out what is living on the outside of these ships, and I'm trying to understand where the ships go so we know, or we will hopefully know, where these species have come from and where in Antarctica they might be going.
Cool, so that sounds like there's a lot of challenges involved in that. What is the trickiest thing about your project?
So there are about a handful of people maybe in the world who are working on this very broad topic or even have ever worked on this topic. So there is just so much that we still don't know. And in fact, one of the most exciting things, but also the most challenging things, is trying to work out which avenues of research to take and which questions to answer. So I've decided to focus on biofouling, so that's the things growing on the outside of ships, and looking at where the ships go, so we can maybe work out where some potential hotspots are and where those, so we can improve monitoring in those areas and have a more targeted sort of policy.
Brilliant. And have you found a group of people who you're currently working with on this?
Yeah, so I'm in the Zoology Department at Cambridge, obviously, but I also work at the British Antarctic Survey. And so I work closely with researchers there, including Kevin Hughes, who's on the Committee for Environmental Protection, and that committee is part of the Antarctic Treaty system, and so I'm working with the people who have direct connection to the policymakers and who might, inform management, which is great. But because I'm interested in the ships as well, I also work with the ships operators at the British Antarctic Survey to understand more about these polar research vessels and where they go and what they do. Amazing.
So although there's not many people working on it, you seem to have found the key people to work with.
Yeah, so there's a group, I guess, in the UK, and there are also a few other people in Australia and in other parts of the world who are working on these sorts of topics.
Really cool. So as sort of conservationists, it seems obvious why we should care about these things, but if you were talking to a member of the public, why would you say that this is important?
Well, there are a couple of reasons, and firstly, Antarctica is a very long way away. It's very remote, it's the southernmost part of the world, but it is very well connected to the rest of the world via a sort of a conveyor belt of ocean currents, as well as things like fisheries. And so, in fact, things that happen in Antarctica actually affect everyone in the world, whether they know it or not. And that's one of the main reasons that understanding what's happening in Antarctica is so important. But another reason is that there are a lot of native species in Antarctica that are found nowhere else in the world. And Antarctica is one of the fastest changing areas in the world from climate change. And the combination of these things means that there might be non-native species coming in, but also the kind of environments and ecosystems in Antarctica are changing, and that may well have many knock-on effects for people and other animals and plants well outside Antarctica.
Yeah, exactly. And even animals, including this one here, which is not actually to do with your research, but it's a pretty cool prop, so we decided to involve. You said that one of your friends made this, was it?
Yeah. So a friend of mine was in Cambridge, and for some of her work they had a couple of these penguins, and she asked me if I wanted a penguin. I didn't know what I was getting, but I said yes anyway, and I ended up with a wonderful penguin that decorates our office.
You've got a pretty good deal there, to be honest. And this is just sort of sits like just diagonal from your desk, so you can see it the whole time. So
if I ever need reminding about, some of the larger animals that live in Antarctica,
we've got this guy.
Yeah.
So how did you first get into Antarctic science?
So when I was an undergraduate at the University of Melbourne, as a part-time job on the side, I worked for a research group that did archival work and managed some archival record collections from a whole range of scientists. And I was working on the personal archive of Dr. Philip Law, who was the first director of the Australian Antarctic Division. And he was about 96 when I first met him. And the group was still collecting documents from him that he wanted put into his personal archive so it could be preserved. And so I spent many, many hours poring over all of his notes and letters and a whole lot of material relating to his life's work. And I found it absolutely fascinating, not just what life was like in Antarctica and the work of setting up Antarctic research in the 1950s and 60s when he was active, but also what the environment is like now and what Antarctic research looks like now. And it looks very, very different from when Dr. Law was a researcher. But it was incredible that I got to meet him, and he took me out for coffee a couple of times, even though he was 96 and couldn't walk very far, but he still had almost more determination as a 96-year-old than I think anyone I've ever met. And at one point he said to me, "Oh, biology's where it's at. Yeah, you should be studying Antarctic biology." And I think I was ready to take on that advice anyway. I'm not sure he needed to say it, but at that point I'd been mostly studying terrestrial biology, and I loved it. And I thought, I think Antarctica, or biology in Antarctica, is mostly marine biology. I don't know anything about marine biology. So in my final year of uni, I took on as many marine biology subjects as I could and discovered that I loved it. And that's how I got into researching Antarctic science.
That's really cool. So you went into marine science, but had you been diving before, or associated with the sea?
No, I grew up in Melbourne, which is not far from the coast. So, I'd been to the beach on holidays, and there'd been occasional trip looking in rock pools for whatever we could find, but I'd never really known much about marine biology at all until I started looking into Antarctic marine biology.
So he really made a big difference then to you at the course of your career,
Absolutely.
I think I was always tending in the direction of biology, but more specifically zoology and ecology. So, looking at what lives in these environments and how they interact. And the Antarctic environment was particularly interesting for me at that point. But my mum is a plant scientist, and so whenever we would go on family holidays, we would also, walk through, beautiful forest and wilderness areas, and she'd say, "Oh, look at this plant, oh, look at that plant." So I think I already had a bit of an idea of what being a researcher in that sort of broad field.
Yeah, so they're like part holiday, part field trip.
Yeah, a lot of...
Some of my school holidays were actually spent doing field work with my mum.
Yeah, very cool. I like that. So you mentioned that there were big differences between the Antarctic sort of in the 50s and 60s and now. So what kind of differences do we see?
One of the biggest differences is that there are now quite a few women who do Antarctic research. That is one of the biggest changes, and the fact that I have been able to get into this field of research is in no small part thanks to the women who went into Antarctic research when it was absolutely dominated by men, and no women went south. But it's very different now. The director of the British Antarctic Survey is a woman, and it's a very different place now. So keep Antarctica as a place for research and a place for peace. And so a lot of the territorial claims and those sorts of politics that were happening in the 1950s and 60s are very different now, because we have structures like the Antarctic Treaty System in place, and there are a number of other agreements that have happened since then to do with particularly environmental protection that make sure Antarctica is a place for research and for sort of peaceful collaboration rather than the sort of politics that came before it.
Brilliant. So are you going to get the chance to actually go to Antarctica?
I really, really hope so. As you can imagine, it's not a straightforward process going to Antarctica. So a lot of things have to go right, whereas, fieldwork in some places, things have to go wrong for fieldwork not to happen. I feel that going to Antarctica, things have to go right for it to happen. I am hoping to go to do some field work as part of my research, and certainly the more I read about it and the different places and the different things that live there and the different ways that we interact with the Antarctic environment, the more keen I am to go.
Yeah. And how long would you be going for? Because they tend to go in like long stints, don't they?
So the length of time that researchers will spend in Antarctica varies a lot depending on their role. So I am probably looking to go on a ship for maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, and go to a few select places and collect some samples. But for people who run the stations and all the tremendous support staff who spend a lot of time there, particularly the ones that overwinter, they might be there for 18 months. So they might go for a summer, stay for the winter, and then they're there for the next summer training the new people in that role.
Yeah, that must take a particular type of person to be able to deal with the Antarctic winters.
Yeah, it would be a very extreme place to be, and even with modern technologies and communications, it's still a formidable and potentially isolating environment.
Yeah, it feels like one of those last things that we can do even in this day and age, which feels like a sort of proper adventure.
Yeah. I can't say from personal experience what it's like, of course, but that's my understanding anyway.
So with all your work, it doesn't sound like you could possibly have time for anything else, but I know you do. So what do you do outside your studies?
Something that actually helped me really, I think, find my place at my college at Cambridge was that I joined an a cappella singing group, and we rehearsed once a week during term time, and one of the key things that got me into that was that there were no auditions. So I knew that it didn't matter how well I could sing, they wouldn't kick me out, I could just come and sing. And we've done a few performances, which has been really nice, and I played music when I was younger, but yeah, it's just something that I sort of stopped doing for a while, and it's really nice to be doing that again. And the other thing that I do, I started taking some lessons in aerial circus, so aerial acrobatics, and at the moment I mostly learn rope. So it's a vertically hanging rope, and I climb it and twist it around me and try not to fall off.
Have you fallen?
Not really. Maybe from sort of a metre, but...
No serious injury?
No serious injury.
Well, thank you so much, Arlie, for coming and talking to us about your work. It's fascinating, and I just can't wait to see what happens with it.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking about my research.
And to make sure that you stay up to date with Arlie's research, you can follow her on Twitter, and also you can follow the British Antarctic Survey's Twitter too. And thank you so much for joining us for another episode of ZooCast. Make sure that you hit subscribe and you'll be the first to know when our next episode comes out.